Before we enter the submarine, I would like to outline why this type is significant. The U995 is a Type 7 German submarine. During World War II, this type of submarine formed the backbone of the German submarine strategy to stop supplies coming into Britain from the US. This campaign was called the Battle of the Atlantic and continued for the duration of the war. During this time, the Allied used a convoy system of ships sailing from ports in the US through the western approaches to Britain. The German Navy in turn deployed a wolf-pack tactic where the submarines would patrol west of Britain with the goal of finding these convoys. When a submarine found a convoy, it would contact command with the location, composition, speed and course of the convoy, but the submarine would not attack but shadow the convoy. The information about the convoy was relayed to other submarines in the area so they could coordinate an attack, hence wolf packs. This type of submarine, the Type 7, would have a crew of approximately 50 men sharing a cramped space for months at sea. Needless to say, it was not for the frail of mind. 703 of them was built out of 1,152 in total of Type 2, 7, 9 and 21. A small disclaimer before we enter. The U995 was a service in the Norwegian Navy in a period after the war, so there may be items in there which are not original. Now let's see how the submarine looks from the inside. This is the stern torpedo room and the room for the electric engines. This is the stern torpedo tubes and the control for it. And the stern torpedo tube could be used for enabling the sub to shoot a torpedo both forward and aft. That would be useful in cases where you would, for example, find yourself in the middle of a convoy, so you can shoot in both directions. The electric engines were used when the submarine was submerged, and it would be able to travel at about 130 nautical miles at about 2 knots, but that was a lot slower than when going under diesel power. The diesel engines recharged the submarine's batteries when traveling at the surface. And we'll see the batteries when we are looking at the officer's mess. The electric engines were two 375 BBC engines. Up here you can see the torpedo loading hatch. This is the engine room. It contains two supercharged 6-cylinder type Maschinenfabrik Ausberg-Nürnberg-Mann, each developing 1,160 brake horsepower with a forced injection by a Bouquet supercharger. These engines allowed the submarine to travel at 17.6 knots on the surface, and the foundation for the engines would run the entire length of the room, only allowing a passage in the middle. These are the temperature gauges for the diesel engine's cylinders. Now, when the engines were running, this would be a loud place to be. It would be dirty, it would be smelly, and it would be hot. This is the submarine's tiny galley used to prepare meals for up to 50 men using a small electric stove with 3 hot plates and an oven. When the hot plates were not in use, a cover could be placed on top to serve as a surface for the preparation of food. The sink has taps supplying hot and cold fresh water and hot and cold seawater used for washing the dishes. Above the galley is a hatch which was used for loading of provisions. In the galley we also find the reserve toilet, but it was usually filled with provisions and thus not used. This is the petty officers and non-commissioned officers' mess. This room has 8 narrow bunks. Since there were more men than bunks, 2 men would usually share the same bunk, working in 12-hour shifts. This is also known as hot bunking. This is the control room or centrale. This is the beating heart of the submarine. This room is located directly under the conning tower with access to the bridge through a ladder. The room is filled with the controls for diving, turning the submarine, and the propulsion controls. It also contains a bilge pump. These red wheels are the control for the aft main balance tank vents. This is the primary bilge pump. This is the chart table where the captain and the officers would work out the navigation. These are the controls for the vents on the bow ballast tanks. These are the dive controls for the diving planes. A submarine of this type would have, once the ballast tanks was filled, it would have neutral buoyancy, which means that the actual dive was controlled by the dive planes. Now, in some cases, when you wanted to dive faster, you could use the negative tank, which was an additional tank you could flood. This is called the Christmas tree, and it's the controls for flooding and venting the main ballast tanks. In US submarines like the Pampinito, the term Christmas tree is also used, but that shows this, which is the indication of open or closed for all vents in the submarine. This is the access ladder to the conning tower, and up here the attack periscope is located, and the TDC, the computer used for calculating the solution for the torpedoes. This is the observation periscope. So the submarine actually has two periscopes. The difference is that the attack periscope is smaller and harder to see. This is bigger and has better optics, so you get a better view. But during attacks, the attack periscope would be used in conjunction with the TDC, the target computer. This is the commanding officer's private cabin, and this is the small area he had. It would also feature a curtain which he could pull to give himself a little more privacy. This is the hydrophone room, or the listening room. This would contain the underwater listening equipment, which we used to identify contacts around the submarine. And the reason that this was done and doing it submerged is that sound travels a lot farther under the water than it does in the air. So this enabled the submarine to actually locate a single ship 20 kilometers away and a convoy 100 kilometers away. Needless to say, that feature is critical for the submarine. This is the radio room where the submarine would communicate with the command, and this is also where the decoding of messages would take place. This is the batteries that we talked about earlier. These served as the capacity for the electric engines. Here we also have the officers' mess. This is where the officers would have their bunks, and contrary to the other bunks, these are personal, so they wouldn't share them with other sailors. This is the toilet. It's the second toilet, but the primary toilet, which would usually be the only toilet to be used by everybody on board. This is the forward torpedo room. It also served as the living quarters for up to 27 men who would live, eat, sleep and work here. It not only stored the torpedoes, but it also would have a large part of the supplies that the submarine would carry. At the very front end of the submarine we can see 4 torpedo tubes. The submarine would carry either steam or electric propelled torpedoes. The steam torpedoes would be able to travel longer and was reliable, but it would leave a trail of bubbles on the surface. The electric torpedoes obviously didn't leave a trail of bubbles, but they were not very reliable in the beginning of the war and couldn't travel that far. When firing the torpedoes in a German submarine, the German word Feuer, meaning fire, was not used because it could be confused with the word for burning fire. Instead, Los was used, which essentially means away.